Hi, everybody, and welcome to Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. My guest today on Attendance Bias is the anchor of Fox 5 News at 5 and 10 in New York City, Steve Lacy. Steve chose to discuss the Phish show from July 12th, 1999 at Great Woods. He had a number of reasons for this show. The first one being that he grew up in Massachusetts, and this was a hometown show for Steve. You'll hear his background about all the shows he saw at Great Woods growing up. And not only that, but it was the band's first show back at Great Woods after a wild weekend in 1995, so it felt like a homecoming for all involved. And on a personal note, when I was a kid, probably 9 or 10 years old, I got a TV in my room, which was a huge deal in my house. And my curfew was to go to sleep at 10 o'clock, but my parents said that I could stay up until 10:30 if I watched the news before going to sleep. So it wasn't long before I became a 10-year-old diehard fan of the Fox 5 News at 10 in New York. This is the local city news. It is not to be confused with the Fox News cable channel. So when I found out that the anchor for the Fox 5 News at 10 is also a big Phish fan, I knew that I would love to talk shop with him. I'm also a big Howard Stern fan, and Steve is occasionally name-checked there, very famously when he wrote an essay to rebut Howard's negative response to Phish back in 2015. Steve's essay in response is in the show notes for today's episode. The bottom line is I want everybody to come onto Attendance Bias. I want everyday fans and friends and also well-known names within the community. I mean, in the end, we're all the same. We just want to talk endlessly about Phish, and I think that came through in today's discussion of July 12th, 1999 at Great Woods. Enjoy. Steve, welcome to Attendance Bias. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love nothing more than talking about Phish, so thank you for indulging me.
That's the whole reason I'm doing this. I needed an outlet. I just needed people who wanted to gab about Phish. So you're one of the first people that came to mind. So I really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Love it.
So to start at the beginning, where are you from?
Okay, I'm from Dighton, Massachusetts, which is a small town in southeastern Mass. It's about 25 minutes from Great Woods, and it's about 25 minutes from Gillette Stadium where the Patriots play. So growing up in southeastern Massachusetts, New England was kind of Phish central.
Yeah. Right. Throughout, they went to, they formed in Burlington. Mike is from Massachusetts, I believe.
He's from Sudbury, which is a fancy suburb of Boston. Yeah.
Okay. So growing up, what music were you into when you were, I'd say, maybe 9, 10, 11, through your teenage years?
Yeah. So for me, I'm 45 years old now. So in, say 1987, I'm 12 years old. That's when my musical awakening happened. Things I remember vividly were the Walk This Way video with Aerosmith, Run DMC. That came out in 86. That puts me in 6th grade. And then from then I became just massive into what we would call, 80s rock, hair metal. I know that's sort of a pejorative term to some people who are involved in it, but Aerosmith, Dokken, Guns N' Roses is absolutely my North Star to this day. Appetite for Destruction completely changed my life. Metallica, any of that sort of MTV rock, Headbangers Ball, classic rock, Boston, any of that stuff that you would have heard on BCN radio, 94 HJY out of Providence, that sort of classic rock genre is completely the foundation for everything that follows.
And you mentioned that hair metal nowadays is kind of a pejorative. I think it's been around so long, or that it's been long enough that now it's coming back around to be cool to be into hair metal. I mean, I think Poison, it's in every bar at a certain hour.
It's interesting. I don't view it as a pejorative term at all. I listen to Hair Nation all the time on Sirius. I understand the point. Like I've heard, Sebastian Bach, he views it as sort of a pejorative put down of that whole genre, because there were bands that were just, basically all glam, all style, no substance. But I mean, like a band like Skid Row, where you could see an early picture of Sebastian Bach with the teased out hair. But if you listen to like Slave to the Grind, that's a heavy band. That's real rock. There's nothing soft about that at all. So I do understand it from the artist's perspective a little bit, how, they don't love being labeled under that banner.
Sure.
But to me, it's all good. And I still love that stuff. I don't want to jump the gun on the segue here, but my first concert when I was 13 years old, as a kid growing up in Southeast Mass who just watched MTV all the time, my dad somehow knew my just love of this stuff was so intense. He bought me tickets to Guns N' Roses opening up for Aerosmith, August 25th, 1988 at Great Woods. We were Section 8. It was such a transformational experience in my life. It's hard to even put into words. This was the crew for the show because I was 13. Me, my dad, Matt Murray, my friend, and Matt Murray's dad. He dragged the dad along to all right, cool, listen, we'll take the two. You sit here with me. And it's the coolest thing. It's because my dad wasn't a music fan. I'm not from like a music, family. So there was something he saw, when I bring home all the rock magazines, he just sensed something in my interest of it. And I can still see to this day the Post-it note in his bedroom window where it said buy Aerosmith tickets. Aerosmith spelled incorrectly, ARROWSMIT. I can see that stick. And I remember he got through. The tickets were $25 a piece, which at the time seemed like, oh my God, we've got $100 of ticket. The whole thing was unspeakable. And then when we get to the show, it's funny, this stuff, because at 13, I just turned 13. I don't know what partying is. I don't know what a concert is. I don't know what wasted is. And I remember at one point he took me to the men's room and there was a woman in the men's urinals and they dragged her out. And I was just like, this is wild. This was a whole new world. You know what I mean? It was just like incredible. And the thing I now realize, which is cool, you don't think your parents maybe are cool or they get it or whatever. But now I realize, he knew what was going on, but in some way I thought like I had to shield him from it or I was going to get in trouble. And of course that was not the deal at all.
Of course they know. They know,
yeah. Right. We always think as kids that we're inventing everything and, and as of course he knew exactly what was going to be going on in the event. And that's why he dragged his adult friend with him too,
Right. And he went anyway, and he brought you. How cool is that, though, looking back on it from an adult perspective, right? Now your dad.
My dad's been gone a long time. It moves me to tears when I think about it, because for him, this was just the most blown day of his life. He had to drive from the Cape to Mansfield, Mass, sit in the parking lot, make sure his kid doesn't get, taken under the wing of some. There was no joy in that for him, but he did it for me. And it's the greatest thing you can do for your kid. It's really one of the best moments of my childhood. It really is.
So I looked over on the WNYW website just for your background and bio. It seems that as a broadcaster, you've kind of moved all over the place, but mostly all over New England, where you were in Maine, Bangor, Maine, Springfield, Massachusetts, Boston. And this is all prime Phish territory. That was my first thought. Forget about broadcasting. That was where, my map was going.
I was very lucky with my whole, my TV career has worked out better than I could have ever hoped for. I'm so appreciative of it, thankful for it. The biggest thing, when you're in a lot of ways, your first TV job is the hardest, because what you're doing is getting someone to agree to give you a job knowing you're not going to add that much value, because if you've never been on camera, you've never reported, and in these smaller markets too, you're your photographer, you're cutting the video. So really, you're begging someone for a first chance, and you're not bringing that much value to the table. You're learning on the job. So I sent out tapes all over the country. And at the time, so this was actually right around the time of the show we're going to talk about. But I would have moved to North Dakota. I would have moved to Rapid City. I would have moved to any of these markets in Texas. Anywhere I sent the tape, I was going to go. And I just happened to get my first job in Bangor, Maine, which was, if you live in New England and you want to do the TV thing, Bangor, Maine is one of the few small markets in New England that you could, conceivably start at. That was the greatest thing on earth. As someone from Boston, it was 3.5 hours away. I could come back on my days off. That was the dream come true. And then you've planted your flag in New England. So if there's other New England jobs, they understand that culturally you kind of get the deal. So then that opened the door for Springfield, and then Boston was the big jump. And then from Boston to New York, it's really, it's worked out so much better than I should have ever hoped for.
Where does Phish come in?
Okay, they creep into that's a great question. So, we talk about, the transition from being an 80s metalhead, hard rock, all that sort of thing. Then in 1993, I go to school in Boston. I go to BC, and Hoist comes out at the end of our freshman year. And, there is a real cultural thing with Phish that I went through where when I was in high school, like one of our friends went to UVM and we'd always be like, oh, you got to listen to Phish, man, blah, blah, blah. Like, Phish was just like this ridiculous thing in Vermont that was like this prep school sort of not of my world phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
So then I went to BC, but then you start getting exposed to kids who did grow up in that world. One of my roommates was from Andover. So the, Lawn Boy starts coming on, Junta, whatever you want to call it. I call it Junta. I've now heard that's wrong. I don't care. It's Junta.
I'm the same exact way. I say Junta because I spend years doing it.
I refuse. I'm a real Phish fan. That's how I want to say it. I'm going to say it that way because I've been saying it for a long time. But I remember the idea of going to that Gamehen show in '94. I feel like I remember being home for a weekend and being like, oh, we should go check this out. But I was still hanging out with my high school friends at the time. And they were like, nah, I don't want to do that. And then finally another year of college. So then it's the sophomore year. Hoist is out. And we dive further into Phish, dive further into the Dead. I remember a lot of Working Man's. And then June 30th, 95, Great Woods was my first show. So that's sort of full circle too with, oh, wow, I saw Guns N' Roses here. I saw a lot of arena rock bands. I mean, I remember seeing like, Vince Neil opening up for Van Halen, Aerosmith, just the sort of, those big summer bill shows that go from venue to venue. And then by the time those summer 95 shows came around, I was psyched. I was ready for it. I couldn't have been more excited. And that's where the whole party started.
What do you remember from that first show at Great Woods?
So I have so many great memories of it. I remember that in those days when there were album sales, and I remember the show was a Friday. They played Friday, Saturday. I just went to the first one. And that Tuesday was when a live one came out. So I bought a live one at Strawberries in Patriot Square, Dennis, Mass. And I listened to it, that whole 3 days. Mm-hmm. I was into it. It wasn't like that wasn't my introduction, but that was like, wow, this is high caliber, well recorded, perfect versions of this stuff. And I can remember driving from the Cape to Great Woods, listening to a live one on loop. And I also remember, I'm trying to remember, I think the show we're eventually going to get to, they always, how they always change the names of these places. Yeah. But by 99, it was the Tweeter Center. I'm not sure if it was called Great Woods still in 95, but I still vividly remember it was
Great Woods in 95, and you're right, it was the Tweeter Center by 99.
So in 99, I remember then I was coming from Boston, and I remember driving up, and you come to the exit, and the Tweeter Center sign, someone put a piece of paper over the T, and it became a Tweezer Center, and I was just like, perfect. I love it so much. It's so great. It's so great.
It's like going down to Maryland and all of a sudden you're on the way to Jerry Weather Post Pavilion now.
I've never heard that. I love that.
So the show that you picked for today, July 12th, 1999, why exactly did you choose this one?
For me, I've grown into appreciating type 2 jamming and that sort of thing. But at my core, I'm all about energy. And certainly when I was 23 years old, I wanted to just punch in the face, bam, rock, tray, shred. And this was a show that really just delivered on what I wanted from Phish at that time. And I also think, I think 97's almost become like this era that's blotted out the sun as far as in Phish criticism, Phish appreciation, whatever you want to call it, where there's so much awesome stuff that happened around 97. Like I'm obsessed with 98. I love 99 because there's maybe it's a little more concise and I'm good with that. You know what I mean? I mean, this is I'm about to say an illegal thing, but when I was seeing Phish in 97, I remember not being obsessed with the stuff that people are obsessed with now. And maybe even I'm more obsessed with now than I was then. I didn't want this endless jamming. I wanted song-oriented energy, party rock fun. And that's what 99 brought to me.
You know, you're not alone in that, because I agree with you that 97 is kind of held up as this all-encompassing greatest year ever. And then it's a race for second place when you talk about that. But I remember, because I started seeing them in 1997 and I saw more shows in 98. And I remember talking to people who said they were bored in 1997 because the jams just went on indefinitely and they were repetitive. I mean, now when you listen back, there's still that unbelievable fire, and there's a reason, I think, that it's thought of in the way that it is. But I agree with you how you called it like a spotting out the sun, that there's room for discussion for more.
Totally. Absolutely right. And like, you know, you're not going to want to dip your toe if you're unsure of your Phish, opinions or whatever. You're not going to want to make that argument online because you'll get flamed immediately. Sure. And my appreciation of 97 has come around, but at the time I want to just bang, 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 more energy, you know?
So they played a big summer tour in 99. It took up almost all of July. It was punctuated by 3 shows, and only 3 shows, at the Naiba Ski Resort in Niigata, Japan. I never heard those shows. I never even heard of those shows.
And that's different than the Fukuoka 2000.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that either. I have no idea of that. Yeah. Wow.
So,
I didn't know that.
There's that. And some highlights of 99, just the summer, were the July 4th show at Lakewood Amphitheater. A lot of people hold in very high esteem. The Chalk Dust Torture from Camden, which was the show before today's. That's July 10th.
Was that
Chalk Dust.
1099?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They played a 5-song second set in Holmdel a few days after the show we're talking about today. Of course, Camp Oswego later in the summer. And the announcement at Polaris Amphitheater is when they announced Big Cypress. That was in the summer they announced it.
Oh, I didn't know that
at a show. Because what happened was at Oswego, which was in the middle of the summer tour, unusually, right? The festivals are always at the end. This was in the middle. They tried to do the world record for most people doing a group dance to do the meat stick, right? And they didn't get it. They didn't get the record.
Right.
So a couple days later, Trey said that they're going to try it again at the big New Year's festival in Florida.
Oh,
and that's how everyone found out.
Okay, I'm going to give you a short piece of not so good news and a short piece of good news. The not so good news is that in the 1998 version of the Guinness Book of World Records, we had the Macarena at 50,000 people. We just played a show in Oswego, some of you were probably there. We attempted to break the world record for the most number of people doing the same dance at one time. That being the meat stick, which we're doing here. We had about 54,000 people doing the meat stick at the same time. The bad news is that, unfortunately, I found out that in the 1999 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records, there's a dance called the Chicken that was done by 74,000 people. So we are now in second place for the world record for the most people ever. But the good news is that sometime soon, maybe on New Year's Eve, we're playing on New Year's Eve in Florida. If you guys all come down. Outdoors. New Year's Eve is going to be outdoors in Florida, and as many of you, we're going to spread the gospel of the meat stick starting now. So everybody.
And one more thing I wanted to ask you about 99 before we get specifically into this show. During my first few interviews of this podcast, when I was just getting my friends involved, out of 10 episodes or interviews that I've recorded so far, 3 people have chosen summer 99 shows.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Which is interesting.
It is interesting. I feel like, I consume a ton of Phish content. It's basically my whole Twitter feed. Like I have a bottomless appetite for this sort of stuff. And I do feel like along the lines of 1997 blotting out everything in its path, 99 has maybe been underappreciated. So I think it's a ripe area for further exploration for sure.
So let's get into set 1 of this show. When I first looked at the set list, because I hadn't heard this show before, and I saw that it opens with Boston's Foreplay and Long Time, I thought that it was their acoustic version that they used to play in 94. They played a whole bunch of them. And when they opened it and I heard Page's organ play the real intro, and I just said, what an opener. It was so fast, and they nailed it when they did it acoustic, but the vibe back then, it was almost like a goof where they were taking this fun, complex song and playing it acoustic as a joke with a banjo and stuff. But this is real. Like, this is very earnest, the way they open it here.
Right. With the banjo, they're almost taking the piss out of classic rock.
Right.
With
right.
this, they're just rocking. Oh, like, I put it this way. I actually listened to the show again yesterday in preparation for this podcast. The chills I got remembering that moment, you know, I've always been like, my whole friend crew, we've always been like, what do you think they're going to open with? What do you think, you know? And I feel like that would be like a type of song. Like, I feel like I may have called that in the parking lot. Now, that may be completely BS, but that would be exactly what I would be going for, because you're dealing with the mythology. Now, the thing is, these July 99 shows, they hadn't played at Great Woods in 4 years,
right?
Because when they played my first batch of shows Friday and Saturday, the whole place got overrun, and Mansfield was like, no more Phish.
Yep.
Certainly no more Weekends. So then the deal they eventually struck 4 years later, Jerry died after the 95 shows, and they didn't come back to Great Woods to 99. That shows you sort of the local trauma of the previous run of Phish shows, and they're like, no. So then finally they were allowed to come back, but on Monday, Tuesday, in an attempt to sort of have less people showing up without tickets. So then you've got that whole mythology. Oh my God, it's been such a long time. They haven't played Great Woods. At that point, I would say, I wouldn't argue it anymore. But I think at that moment in time, too, Great Woods was their home venue. That was like their Madison Square Garden.
Sure.
So they opened that show. And when I was listening to this in my basement yesterday, I realized not only is that as happy as I could be at a Phish show, that moment is as happy as I'm capable of being in life, period. The chills I got from replaying that, and the roar as the crowd realizes what's going on, and then just building up to Trey shredding that solo. It's unbelievable. And then you add in the whole level of however many decades later, that, you know, the whole Boston thing becomes a basis for the Baker's Dozen.
Right.
So
right.
then you see night 12 of the Baker's Dozen, and if you were at that show, there's this full circle element that's incredible. You know, and it's like you could even go further, because what's Boston? A guitar-based band by a genius who went to MIT. So it's like Tom Schatz and Trey, to me, are just cut of such the same cloth. I could watch either of them play anything forever.
And you probably have that sort of thing in common, where he's spoken in the past about how he was like any other kid growing up in suburban New Jersey, listening to whatever rock music was on at the mall. And I'm sure, because this was one of Boston's biggest hits, that when he was up there, you could hear it in his voice on the recording. He's just rocking out. This is a dream of his, I'm sure, to just scream those lyrics. And Phish is, God love them, not known for their power vocals, but but he nails this. It's really impressive how he wraps his whole self around this. The whole band does, for that matter.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I'm just realizing this now because in that you reference Bittersweet Motel when he's like, I grew up listening to this. And he sort of throws it off with a little bit of disdain. He's like, I grew up listening to Boston. Like he was sort of embarrassed of it. And there's this thing they do where they almost have to, like, at first they ironically embrace their influences from a distance. They don't want to really fully get too emotionally invested in like trying to do the exact cover. But then over time they get more comfortable. It's almost like the same thing with the Dead, where like they started with it, then they ran away from it, and then they finally felt safe to embrace it. So I think this is the moment where they're like, no, we're just going to play it. The first of 2 sold out shows at Great Woods, and we are going to rock out 2 4-play long time, straight up album version. And I didn't realize until we were about to talk. See, that was my experience. I didn't realize that this was the only time they've done that.
Yeah.
So like I would see the 4-play long time maybe on cassettes or it's, whatever early Phish material I could grab in this pre-internet world and not realize that they weren't full rock. That it was
it's a bluegrass banjo version. It's almost a joke. Well, this is the real deal. They slay it. And then right after that is Down with Disease. And I wrote down that this is the kind of show where the second song goes for almost 20 minutes. And we don't really get that anymore. And 1999 was a good year for long jams, but we didn't always get them so upfront and so early in the set. And this is a fan favorite, right? 1,000 Barefoot Children dancing on my lawn. And I loved it. This was a really patient version. I mean, you guys must have been going out of your mind after that opener. And then to get slayed with this is just totally it up.
Yep, absolutely. Like, I mean, Down with Disease. I love that as much as I love any Phish. I think, a lot of times when people are like, oh, what would you suggest I listen to get into Phish? I say Down with Disease album version, because I think all the elements of what you love about Phish are there in a succinct, compact way. So for me, Disease is always welcome. And you had that massive, where do you go from 4-play long time in Boston? And then to go there, I'm like, oh, all right. Like it's really full on. We're not going to take a step back. We're not going to take a breather. Let's just keep blasting away. That's ecstasy. I love it. I live for that.
And what I noticed about this jam, and it's kind of became a theme throughout the whole show, because of this podcast, I've listened to more Summer 99 than I pretty much ever had before. It's everyone's favorite. And especially I'm thinking of the Merriweather Post show, which I think was about 3 days before this one, and Oswego later in the summer. A lot of 1999 jams go at like 1,000 miles per hour. And they're kind of schizophrenic, where they have this amazing sound, this amazing jam, and then all of a sudden it's like someone flips a switch and they're in a completely different song. There's no sequence to it. But Down with Disease, from like 11 minutes, Mike really patiently leads a rhythm and the band catches on. And then a little bit later, Trey gets a little more abstract, but everyone hangs on to it. It really has patience. They really sound like full band jamming, as opposed to, okay, let's try A and now B, and then C. It really holds together. It's really impressive.
Yep.
And on top of that, they close it. They finish the song, which almost never happens in that year.
Oh, I didn't even realize that. Interesting.
Yep. And then after that Down with Disease comes their favorite new toy at the time, Back on the Train, which was new. It was only the fifth time they played it.
Right. Now, what's interesting there is, so Farmhouse didn't come out until June of 2000. So I'm trying to think what my impression would have been, but I truly don't remember. But I'm just thinking I would have been loving it. I love Bot, and I also think they built such equity with those first two songs that even if that's a song I probably wasn't super familiar with, like I'm going with it. Like, I'm
Sure.
psyched. You've earned my trust with this show. Let's, like, great, whatever you want to do here. And then, I mean, I love Bot. The only issue back then would have been not being super familiar with it, but I was just full on board with wherever they were taking it. So my impression is I probably loved that,
And if you weren't familiar with it yet, by the end of the tour, you would have been, because out of 26 shows on the tour, they played this 10 times.
Isn't that fascinating?
That's a high percentage.
Yeah, that it. I always, I find it very interesting, songs that are in the live rotation before they're on the album. Like when you find, like, A Touch of Grey from like an 82 Dead bootleg or something.
Yeah.
I find that super satisfying because, I mean, for, Touch of Grey, that was my entry point into the Dead in 87, like everybody. I mean, it was on MTV, like, oh, this is the Grateful Dead. I know they're the symphony band from the 60s. And it's kind of cool to know, like, there was nothing selling out about that. That was just a succinct, well done version of a song that they'd been working out for years. Like, I think that's really cool, Yeah,
it is. And I first heard it that fall. I didn't get to see any of the summer 99 shows. So I was seeing all these song titles, not knowing what they sounded like, including the next song, which is What's the Use?
Now, this is what I'll say about that. Then this will touch upon what we were talking about, 97, not being obsessed with jams. I remember, my guess would be I was not into What's the Use at that moment. What's the Use is now one of my favorite songs as my sort of ability and appreciation of longer form. Now that riff kills me. Like, it's so dark and heavy. But I saw a great tweet about it. It was the guy, Amir Brahman Noodles, who does the guitar. He's like this amazing guitarist. He posts licks and everything. He's like, he described it as something. He posted an acoustic version of it. And it was like, it's, dark, depressing, but ultimately hopeful. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so brilliant. That emotion that comes in that, it's like three notes. It's like, wah, 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 wah.
Yeah.
I could live in that now. Back then, I'm sure, what, I'd bet you anything that was a piss break song for me back then.
Probably. There wasn't much of a response from the crowd, and it's almost 9 minutes long.
I would bet you a lot of money I went to the bathroom during that song.
And I'm sure there was a line for it too at that time. And then next is Split Open.
Totally.
And next was Split Open and Melt, which is, a crowd favorite. And it's weird. I was listening to this again today on a walk, and the jam that begins, to me, and this is like time traveling in my own head, it reminded me of Golden Age, even though they wouldn't play that for another 10 years. That debuted in 2009. But Trey's doing this really cool guitar picking melody or rhythm that sounds a lot like Golden Age, but it's completely, 10 years before. And he's very minimal. And Mike really steps forward for this one, and it gets kind of floaty. And I don't know, I expected Split Open and Melt to kind of move away from any structure, but Fishman holds it tight and Page holds it tight, while Mike and Trey kind of go off, which is unusual.
There's a lot of Mike in this show. Like when I was listening back to it, like really like creating sort of the interesting ballast for Trey to play off. Like, I feel like he's high up in the mix, and it's like a very active mic, you know, like, and I like that.
I wrote down in my notes, it sounds like it should be the end of the set, but it's only been about an hour in or less. You know, it feels very big, this split opening now. It's very dynamic.
Yeah, right. Sure. That's a statement piece, right? Yeah.
And then they play Water in the Sky, which is nice and playful as usual. And then you think about it looking back, this is a song that in a few months would be one of the more legendary set openers of all time at Big Cypress with the Filter Out the Everglades line. This opened the whole festival.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You know what? I got to say, to this day, Big Cypress is my biggest Phish regret. And my other buddy who I've been to, I've been all my shows with my buddy Brian, and he didn't go either. The interesting thing, this could be a whole podcast, is the idea of like time versus money. When I was younger and I didn't have any particular career or whatever, I was living so hand to mouth, and I was never the guy. Like I talked to Mike Fenoy about this all the time. He was the guy who would go on tour and sell cigarettes and do the whole thing and make grilled cheese. Like, anytime I tried any of that foolishness, I was just a complete failure at it, So it was like, I would hit my 2 shows that were closed. I'd take the day off from whatever, crappy job I had. And then that was it. Like, I never did tour. I see more shows now in a sense because,
Same.
It's like I've got a job and I can pay for it. And
I need that security. Yeah.
No, totally. And I prioritize it in my life. I saw 11 shows last year because I knew I was going to have a kid. So it was just sort of like the whole mantra of that year was like, I'm going to see as much Phish as I can because next year I'm not going to be able to. And God knows how prescient that was in ways we never could have anticipated.
Right. Fingers crossed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully your child isn't too old by the time you get back into it.
God, I know.
We're dying here.
Brutal.
But to close it, though, is Character Zero, Old Reliable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a really big Type 1 jam. When I listened to it the first time, and I'm focused on jotting down my thoughts in preparation for this, I always listen to these shows at least a second time, just freewheeling, just walking around doing nothing. And this Character Zero really got my attention today.
But, my recollection is it was just a summer crowd. Everyone was younger. I mean, because I feel like I've always felt like, right now I'm at 45. I feel like that's a pretty representative Phish fan. There's people younger than me. There's people older than me. And there's a lot of people my age. So this was a show when you were 23. Like people were just there to party. This was, New England. This was summer. It was the All-Star Game weekend. That was the thing too. So in Boston, the second show, I know people who didn't go to the second show because they stayed and were sort of, involved in the All-Star Game thing. So the whole weekend just had a big feel to it. It was like Boston was the center of America that weekend. So the Character Zero, like, that's just good. Let's just fun, upbeat rock, close or bang. Let's go into set break hot, and then see what's up.
To start set 2, they open with Twist. And my first thought listening to it was, oh, it's the old school opening, where it's just the 3 guitar chords and the band singing over no full instrumentation. I kind of missed that. I almost forgot about it. When you re-listened, did you notice that?
You know what? I didn't re-listen to that, and I totally forgot about that. I think yesterday a thunderstorm happened, and my dog started freaking out. See that, and that's what I love about Phish, though. Like, if you want to learn about it, you could spend the rest of your life studying about it, and you won't even scratch the surface. Like, I was there, and I don't even know that was some alternative to a version of a song I see now. You know what I mean? It's so vast. You can't even. God, you can think about it forever.
Time is a flat circle. In case you forgot, right?
The universe is a donut, bro.
That's right. And this Twist is on the Phish.net jam charts. It is very good. It reminds me a little bit of later, and we'll get there in just a little bit of time, to the David Bowie that comes later in the set. In that, and also I guess Split Open and Melt, that I'm thinking about it out loud now. It was almost a thing where 2 band members stayed steady, and then 2 other band members would look for the exit. So they were pretty focused, but also still the Phish we all know and love, looking to improvise and jam. And there's this section toward the middle. It's about 8 minutes to 10 minutes where it peps up, and holy crap, like you are listening to, the Symphony of the Gods for 2 minutes. And then it gets really funny because they don't know how to end it yet.
Right.
Like it just kind of peters out.
That was the fun thing about back then was now they're coming from a sober headspace. There's less shows, so each show is more precious. So many of them are at Madison Square Garden, so they really go the extra mile for that. Back then, it's like they were still just almost like precocious genius students, plunging headlong into the abyss without a real exit plan for a lot of that stuff. And sometimes it would just sort of dissolve, but who cares? We're on to the next. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that kind of fits what we know about Trey's personality also. He's always right on the edge. We call it Trey DHD. Like he's always thinking a little bit ahead to the point where it's like, all right, we got to end it. How do we do it? And by the time they get there, you almost don't care because of what came before it.
No, totally. And, the thing just as take a little detour here for a second, I think one of my favorite songs is like First Tube to me is like on the Mount Rushmore of Phish. And I realized what I like about it now is I think in my mind, who knows, this is a bunch of nonsense a Phish fan is thinking of himself.
That's what this podcast is for. This is all a bunch of nonsense.
That's right. Exactly. Can you imagine someone who doesn't know what we're talking about listening to this?
Yeah, right.
People are insane. But why I love First Tube is I feel like, with sobriety, I feel like Trey feels there might be a conflict between the ego necessary to be a guitar god and being sober. And I think like First Tube is the one place where he allows that side of him, which he views as something that's got him in trouble in the past. He says, you know what, I'm going to storm around the stage. I'm going to rant and rave. I'm going to rock out. I'm going to throw the guitar in the air at the end of the song. Now, that's his cheat day. That's when he gets to have dessert or something. And that's what I love about it, because it used to be all that, you know what I mean, for the most part, and sort of watching him learn how to control that. But that's why that's a sidebar I always love First Tube, because that's when he's saying, you know what, I get to be egomaniac rock guitarist in this song, and I love it.
And maybe that's why he closes so many shows. So that's the last thing he gets to do before they walk off stage.
Right. And he's home 3 minutes later in his apartment. It's crazy. I don't know how he comes down that fast from these shows.
So after Twist kind of peters out, there's a good back and forth. There's Moment Dance and Makasupa Policeman. Mm-hmm. And Moment Dance is slower than usual. I thought they played slow in 3.0. If you listen to this one, it's like half speed, and it benefits the song. It's a good thing for Moment Dance. Yeah,
I love MoMA. You know what? I'm asking this. So what, MoMA was Black Eyed Katie at some point? When did it become? When did it switch? I don't even know.
I know that around the New Year's run '97, they played it as Black Eyed Katie, because I know it was played on December 30th of that year. And I know that it was recorded as the MoMA Dance on The Story of the Ghost, which came out in 1998.
Yeah,
so it's got to.
So this is early into being MoMA, first couple years or whatever.
Yeah, this has got to be one of the first performances of it as the MoMA Dance and not Black Eyed Katie, I'm guessing.
Yep. Well, for those two, so we're talking about MoMA and Makasupa. I love MoMA unabashedly. That's awesome. Makasupa, I'm not super into. Yeah. And I think I know from your notes, there were some interesting things where he referenced, what's the reference and all that sort of stuff.
The key word for this one is stink kind. And I guess that's weed. I would have known when I was 23, but now it's just, oh, that's cute. But it's weird because normally Makasupa is like a joke song. I know that they used to play it sometimes when security was being a little over aggressive at a venue. These days, they probably don't even hear word of that. But I know they used to play it then. But this version is 6 minutes long. And I usually consider Makasupa some kind of joke. You know, it's kind of like just a tossed aside thing.
Makasuba is not going to go anywhere you don't know it's going to go. So it's just sort of, it's a rote song. I don't love it.
It is a little nice jam around 4 minutes into this. It's not long. It doesn't take you to any other world, but it does make it a little atypical for a Makasupa Policeman. So if you do end up listening to this second set again, don't skip over Makasupa.
Oh, interesting, because I definitely would, so that's good to know. Yeah.
Don't give it a shot. And then after that, though, is the big centerpiece of the set is David Bowie, which is 21 minutes long.
I still remember that intro so well.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So I was in the pavilion, which I never was back then. Like I don't know how we got these. I don't know. I truly have no idea how I got them. I was always in the lawn at that phase of my life, but we were down low, and I remember someone coming doing the cymbal intro, and the stories get scrambled over time, but like either my friend was ironically yelling Maze or someone next to us was being like, it's Maze, it's Maze, Maze. So it really was like before the whole Maze Bowie thing became like such a joke, you purposely yell out the wrong song. I remember someone earnestly yelling out the wrong song. I can remember it clear as day. And I also remember being ecstatic at the Bowie because then probably maybe even more than now. Like I loved Bowie back then. That was when I would hack around on a guitar, and I think I'd been like, that riff, I had learned it. And I was very into Bowie at that moment in time. So that Bowie was just so welcome.
And this is a good one to get into. If there were a time for you to be into David Bowie, this is a great one for you to witness. It's, again, there's two band members. It's Paige and Trey, who keep kind of switching back and forth for brief periods while Mike and Phish hold it together. It's very similar to Twist early in the show in that it dips its toes into a lot of jams, but doesn't really jump off into any of them. But it kind of works because they're able to keep that vibe going for so long. And of course, back in 1999, the composed section is flawless. So it's a really, it's a treat for the ears.
Because they're playing 200 shows a year. I mean, they just toured so much back then. Right.
And then to wrap up the set, there's two Animal songs. There's the Lizards and then Gaiute.
I don't think I realized at the time that now Lizards is maybe more of a rarity or something. Like to me, Lizards was just like a good rock and Phish song, but like there was this reverence in the room around it that I didn't fully appreciate, like that it had become less common over time.
Yeah, I don't have the stats on hand, but Lizards is definitely, to use quotes, a special song. It is.
Right, it's like a big treat now if you get it. Absolutely right, and I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and so I wrote always a crowd favorite, and you could hear it on this recording. There's a great cheer when they started playing it right after Bowie. It was played 4 times in that year, in 1999. So that's, I don't know if that's good or bad or common or uncommon compared to other years, but that
was probably uncommon for like that was not played a lot for back then.
Yeah,
maybe like I bet if you went in 95, you would see a Lizard like every other show or every third show or something. And then I love Gaiute because again, to me, this is a very like Mike forward show where like that, the peak of Gaiute, it's just so filthy and dirty, and it's like the build up. And the bass is like the lead guitar, and then it explodes, and it's like that was everything I wanted out of life at that moment. You know what I mean? To me, that's just such an unbelievable set closer. That build up and release is everything. it drives me nuts. I just love it so much. Like, it hurts to love something so much, honestly.
And the encore was a pretty straightforward, short and sweet rock and roll, where Page nails the vocals, and he almost shows off a little bit, where today he's a bit more measured with his singing and a little more, I don't know if saying more intelligent with it, but more pre-planned. You could hear him. He changes his vocals a little bit. He was really pushing it because it was only a little less than a year since they debuted it, since Halloween 98. There was a quick guitar solo toward the end, and, what a way to close it. Walking out of this show with one another must have been exhilarating. You must have felt like $1 million.
You know what? Phish, it's always like, oh my God, we get to do it again tomorrow. As long as you've got to do it again tomorrow, you're on top of the world. I mean, I remember that. I remember walking out of there, and to me, rock and roll is, I love it so much. It's the perfect second set opener. Like, when we'd always bet on songs with the guy, like, I would always call rock and roll set 2 opener. And there was a while there where, like, I'd win that bet. But then it's like, I think it's impossible now to sort of call. I'm almost out of the game of, like, what are they going to open with? Because now, like, between me and my mind or whatever, we've got a list of 300 songs we're playing with. It's like, they're not trying to do a show that you could call anymore. If I'm trying to call a show that was my peak from 99 or something, you're not going to get that show. And that's what keeps them relevant. But I love rock and roll so much because, again, then it forces concision on them. Like, they just all really put it into this tight package to end it off on. And then you're like, oh my God, let's do it again tomorrow. Fantastic.
Well, Steve, to quote a favorite, Howard Stern, we've said it all.
Maybe too much.
Anything we didn't say, anything you wanted to say about Phish, about the show, anything you want to plug that we didn't get to?
No, I feel good. Like, I worked up a sweat, man. I'm all hot and bothered after that conversation. It's just so good to go into it at such detail with someone. I truly like talking about this stuff with a knowledgeable fan is one of my favorite things on earth, because you're always learning stuff. I mean, again, look how many things about a show I was at did I not even know about. and I thought I knew, you think you know everything. It's like, there's so much
never
more.
Know anything.
I can't get enough of it. And I do want to, it was great doing your podcast because, you sent me the detailed show notes. I'm like, wow, this is going to be interesting. And then I listened to some of the episodes and they were all great.
Thank you.
Like, this passion, you should be really proud of it. The passion of all the fans comes through, because I listened to the woman from Female Centrics. I listened to the Eliza Alashon because I heard her name on Phish Radio and wanted to see what she's about. And it's like, there's so many Phish friends I have that, like, I don't even know what they do for a living. It's just like, how many shows have you been to? What shows are you going to? That singular passion in this world is such a break from everything outside of it. That's like the magic of all of it. It's the community. It's everyone just being so involved in this one wacky band that by no rational measure, like the idea that they would have ever gone from Nectar's to 17 nights in 2017 at Madison Square Garden, like, it's inconceivable. And it's like the idea that something inconceivable but positive can come to pass in this world we live in, to me, is so inspiring. It's like the longest of long shots, and by not in any way chasing commercial success, that they got more than 99.9% of bands could ever hope for. That, to me, is the most inspiring thing on earth. I love it. It gives me endless energy, creativity, inspiration. It's just, I just feel like we all owe so much to them. It's just, it's so powerful. It's just the greatest part of my life. I love it, And
that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you, Steve Lacy. Thank you so much for taking the time out, for being here. I appreciate it so much.
My pleasure. Let's talk 3 more hours on the phone after this.
Will do. Will do.
Take care, man.
Well, Steve and I did not talk for another 3 hours on the phone after the interview ended, but it certainly felt like we could. It was such a great discussion, and I feel like we could have gone on forever, or there could have been 2 or 3 more podcasts within our discussion. But unfortunately, we just didn't have the time or the infrastructure to get that done. Instead, let's fact check some of the more uncertain parts of our conversation. First off, Steve's first show, which he mentioned was at Great Woods on June 30th, 1995, was a quintessential 1995 show, which may personally be my favorite year of Phish. That show featured Trey playing guitar with his teeth during Scent of a Mule, there was a Dave's Energy Guide tease during Possum, and a Mike's Into Contact into Weekapog, and finally, an Antelope with alternate lyrics that said, "Suck the deer shit from the side of this hole." And he was 100% correct that the shows were on a Friday and a Saturday. There was also some discussion about the name of the amphitheater in 1995 to 1999. In 1995, it was still called Great Woods, but in 1999, it had been renamed the Tweeter Center, but as any fan will tell you, it's always been and always will be Great Woods. I spent some time talking about the summer tour, and I mentioned that the band played 3 standalone shows in Niigata, Japan at the end of the 1999 tour. After I looked a little deeper into it, these shows were part of the Fuji Rock Festival, and once I found that out, I realized that yes, I have heard of those shows. Even better, all 3 shows are available on Phish.in as soundboard recordings. The show at the Polaris Amphitheater, where Trey announces the Big Cypress Festival, was played on July 23rd, 1999, if you want to check that out. It was also recently released as an official live Phish recording. I mentioned Phish's acoustic version of Boston's 4-play Long Time. They played that acoustic version 9 times from October to December in 1994. It's not too different in tone from their a cappella version in Freebird, in my opinion. It's impressive, but it's still a kind of goofy way to play an epic rock classic. If you haven't heard it before, check it out when you get a chance. Steve mentioned that this show was played during over the All-Star Weekend in 1999. Turns out that the American League won over the National League that year by a score of 4-1. And of course, wouldn't you know it, the MVP was Pedro Martinez, who became the first pitcher to begin an All-Star game by striking out the side and striking out 5 out of 6 batters he faced. We also spoke a bit about the debut of the MoMA Dance as it was transformed from Black Eyed Katie. Neither of us could nail down exactly when that happened, and it turns out that the final performance of Black Eyed Katie was on December 30th, 1997 at Madison Square Garden, and the MoMA Dance premiered on June 30th, 1998 at the Grey Hall in Copenhagen, Denmark. So I was right about December 30th, but wrong about this show being one of the first performances of the MoMA Dance. And that is it for today on Attendance Bias. I'd like to extend my thanks to Steve Lacy for taking the time to talk Phish. And if you're in the New York City area, Steve can be seen on the Fox 5 News at 5 and 10 p.m. If you like Attendance Bias, please support the show by subscribing, rating, and reviewing it wherever you get your podcasts. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you next time.